Hello, everyone. My name is Annabelle Gonzalez. Greetings from Geneva. Welcome to the technical workshop on COVID-19 vaccine research and development, manufacturing, and distribution. Let me touch on a couple of organizational points. Interpretation into English, French, and Spanish is available. You may choose your preferred language by clicking on the globe icon at the bottom of your Zoom screen. And please post your questions for the speakers using the questions and replies function. So let's get started. At the WTO, we are committed to assist WTO members to better understand and address trade issues related to the pandemic. We have produced a wide range of information resources which are available on the WTO website and are regularly updated. In this context, we have designed this workshop to improve our understanding of the rapidly evolving and complex aspects of COVID-19 research and development and manufacturing and distribution from a practical perspective. I would like to thank each of our speakers for sharing their knowledge and time with us. They are experts in their respective fields, and you will find their bios on the webpage of the workshop. And this, I think, is a unique opportunity and privilege to have them here with us today around our virtual table. So thank you very much for joining us. Our audience are government officials from WTO members and observers with responsibilities for the negotiation and implementation of issues at the crossroads of trade, intellectual property, and health. While these issues have traditionally been under the responsibility of different authorities, one of the silver linings of the pandemic is the stronger and more effective coordination among different agencies. I sincerely hope that this workshop will contribute to your work, both in Geneva and in capitals around the world. Today's workshop is divided in 5 sessions. The first introduces us to the world of vaccine research and development, manufacturing, and technology transfer to ramp up distribution. We will then move on to the sessions on sourcing inputs and global value chains, the regulatory dimension, distributing vaccines globally, and finally, to getting vaccines into arms. I would like to start by giving the floor now to Dr. Matthew Donham from the Coalition for Epidemic Preparedness Innovations. Unfortunately, Matthew is not in a position to stay until the end, so please post your questions using the Q&A function on Zoom. Matthew, you have the floor.
Thank you very much indeed, Annabelle, and thanks very much to everybody organising this meeting to be able to present today and introduce this incredible session, which I'm sure will be very interesting and very fruitful in the discussions. I'm hoping you can see my slides, which I've put up on the screen. I'm going to make into, there we go, into that broader segment. So as you can see, I'm very proud to be able to present this introduction to the vaccine R&D manufacturing and technology transfer, particularly with the focus on ramping up the capacity. And as mentioned, I am Director Manufacturing and Supply Chain Networks. I think what's fundamental to recognize amongst research and development right the way through the chain, through to manufacture, formulation and fill, and distribution of vaccines, is that it requires a considerable amount of organization, coordination, collaboration, synchronization, and timing. And if anyone, maybe as a small child, maybe lined dominoes up, as you can see in the image to the right, this is largely what it is. For the dominoes and the activities to fall in an appropriate sequence requires those dominoes to be standing up, pointing in the right direction, and able to fall and knock the next activity to continue the progression of events. It's like a chain reaction. Any of these dominoes are out of place, any of them are pointing in the wrong direction, if any of them are not synchronized and organized accordingly, then that brings to a halt some of the elements of activity required to knock all of the dominoes over and reach that final goal. And there's examples of that in vaccine manufacturing right the way through the process.
Matthew, sorry to interrupt you, Matthew. We cannot see your slides advancing, unfortunately.
Okay, let's see. Can you see it now advancing?
Not yet. Can you back out and then try resharing your screen, please?
Okay, let's try that. Okay. Can you see? Okay. Can you see my screen now?
We can see your screen. Can you try moving into the slides mode so we can watch?
Yeah, I can try that. Here we go. I'm putting it into slideshow. Is that correct?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh no, it is on your
A
screen.
bit slow, unfortunately.
Right now,
Don't go to rhythm mode then.
can you move to,
First is to select the full screen slide.
so first you need to connect to full screen slideshow and then try to share your screen, please.
Yeah, okay, it is trying. I can't see. Resume slideshow. Let's do that.
Alternatively, you could use the reading view if that shows better.
How do I get to that?
Next to slide.
To the left of the slideshow button, please.
Okay.
Alternatively, we can run the slides from here if you would like.
Why don't we do that?
Okay, just a moment, please. Thank you.
It's like it's freezing up on me. Sorry about that. Okay, this works better. I apologize for that. So maybe if we jump to this slide, okay, I've spoken to this slide. Maybe we move on in the interest of time. I can see it's ticking on. So certainly in terms of vaccine platform technologies that require this end-to-end synchronization, organization, and collaboration, there's quite a range of technologies. There's whole pathogen vaccines, and typically an example there might be a live attenuated vaccine or an inactivated vaccine. And you can see some of the examples of diseases that have vaccines to these made from these respective technologies, whether it's chickenpox or yellow fever, for example, for live attenuated, or polio or whooping cough for inactivated. Research and development through to manufacture has also delivered subunit vaccines, viral vector vaccines, and nucleic acid vaccines. And you can see the nucleic acid vaccines are largely the newest ones, the newest vaccine candidates around, particularly the mRNA, as you can see, particularly for the COVID-19 vaccines from, let's say, Pfizer and Moderna. So the vaccine categories really drive that early research and development. It also drives the manufacturing platforms that are leveraged to deliver them, and it drives how their yields are provided and supported, particularly for each respective disease. If, for example, the vaccine is being manufactured in low middle income countries. Next slide. So in terms of the end-to-end activities, what do we mean by that? So through 2021, CEPI undertook an extensive survey. We tracked across manufacturing capacity and capability in Latin America, the Caribbean, Africa, Middle East, Southeast Asia, and Western Pacific. And we asked respondents to address some core questions, as we can see on the screen right now. What research capabilities do they have? What kind of characterization of novel vaccine candidate abilities have they? In terms of development, once you've identified a candidate, what's the next domino in the chain? And that's develop it. How well can it be manufactured? What analysis is required? And what kind of support is needed from a GMP, a good manufacturing process perspective, to be able to deliver the vaccine economically and efficiently, not just for commercial trial use, but that broader commercial element in maybe a mass vaccination campaign. The next domino in the line, as it were, is drug substance. How do you provide that starting seed? So you've gone through the research, you've gone through the development. We're now into the first or early stages of good manufacturing practice, providing the starting seed that will be bulked up and made into millions and millions of doses for commercial use. Then there's the drug product. How do you bulk that up? How do you manufacture literally billions of doses? And we've seen elements of that, obviously, right the way through the COVID campaign that is still ongoing, of course, and incredibly so. There's the formulation and filling. So you have your concentrate. You need to dilute it. You need to formulate it, maybe with an adjuvant, if it's a protein-based vaccine. And it has to have a specific formulation. It has to have a specific concentration, or if it's a viral vaccine, a set specific number of viral particles per vial, per filling commodity. So that element is all about putting the vaccine into syringes, into glass vials, into sprayers, There's even looking at innovations in terms of patches now, patch technologies. Finally, there you can see there's the packaging and the label, the boxing up of the vials, the languages, the terminology, the legal elements that have to go on to the labeling to ensure that it is ethically and appropriately prepared for clinicians, for medical practitioners, for administrators around the world to be able to use that vaccine appropriately and critically be able to understand what risks, what potential adverse events are there. In a post-vaccination situation, the person might be asked to just sit maybe for half an hour, let's say, to see if they have any kind of adverse reactions. That is all detailed on the packaging and the labeling. The storage and the distribution. We've seen elements of this through COVID-19 in Africa in terms of storing vaccines, particularly if they have to be stored at things like -70, -80, as mRNA vaccines do. How then do you logistically distribute the vaccines given the criteria of storage? So it starts with the initial concept, the research, the development to be able to make the vaccine, making the vaccine in the various stages of drug substance, drug product, the ability to formulate and fill, and then package and label and distribute. This is the end-to-end chain of vaccine manufacturing, from initial concept to delivery of an effective product. Next slide, please. So what CEPI is about to embark on is an expression of interest to identify facilities of vaccine development and manufacturing capability. We're going to identify these against a quorum of eligibility criteria with intent to fund gaps or direct funding towards facilities to resolve gaps such that they have an improved preparedness and response capability to future epidemics or pandemics. And there are 7 core criteria that you can see on this screen that we're going to be vetting, as it were, or stratifying the organizations against. Have they got the capability to develop and supply vaccine candidates for use in a good manufacturing setting, either to provide drug substance or drug product? Can they rapidly provide vaccine emergency countermeasures? In other words, can they do the latter stage component of the slide I showed a little earlier with the ticks on the drug substance manufacture, filling and distribution? Can they provide training? Can they evaluate innovative equipment to improve efficiencies and make production of vaccines more economically viable? That all requires understanding of the processes, tech transfer, and training ultimately to be able to use that new equipment. There's also that legal element. There's the appropriate intellectual property and associated licensure rights to be able to undertake the required activities. mRNA vaccine providers tech transfer in their capabilities to a contract development organization or facility has a host of legal and intellectual property elements around it that also need to be resolved. And what CEPI is thinking about here is how that supports the equitable access goals of CEPI. Fundamentally, the facilities have to have that proven capability of quality, good manufacturing readiness to manufacture, and that recorded regulatory experience. I'm very excited to say, actually, literally in the last 15 or 20 minutes, this expression of interest has gone live on CEPI's website. So if you wanted to go to CEPI's website now, look at the calls for proposal, and it's the newest one on the block. It's the last one in the list of open calls at the moment. It's not the only call on the list. CEPI reintroduced its central lab network call at the end of last year. This is going to close at the end of February, and it's to expand the laboratory network to provide that analytical capability that helps feed and support the understanding of disease progression. And we're looking now particularly to onboard Southern Hemisphere organizations. That epidemiology, that disease mapping, all factors into what manufacturing strategy is applied. The last one there you can see at the bottom is the innovative technologies. This was actually published last week, the 3rd of February. And this is to look at the innovations. How do we identify innovations to tech transfer, particularly into low middle income countries, to improve the efficiencies with which they manufacture vaccines in future to be in this state of epidemic or pandemic preparedness. So it's a very exciting time for CEPI. It's a very exciting period, and we're very much looking forward to not just the discussions today, but the future discussions as we progress to support the improvement of vaccine capacity and capability worldwide. And with that, and apologies once again for the technical issues at the start, but thank you, the Secretariat, for for helping with the slides, and I'll happily address any questions. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Matthew. I know that you have to leave, but I want to pose two questions from you. One we have from Ambassador Pitfield, thank you very much, which basically says, at what stage of the vaccine manufacturing process do you seem to encounter or to face bottlenecks or supply chain disruptions the most? That is one. And the second one really is one that I would like to ask you, which is, which concrete measures to facilitate technology transfer have proven to be an effective tool to ramp up vaccine capacity? So if you could address these two questions in about a minute each, if I may say. Thank you.
Right. Okay. Well, thank you very much indeed. Bottlenecks in manufacturing, they can occur right the way through the manufacturing process, from how well a product can be manufactured upstream in terms of the fermentation, in terms of the generation of the antigen or component, through the downstream processing, the purification, the packaging. So bottlenecks and problems can occur at any stage of the vaccine manufacturing process. They tend to be less towards the end because you have kind of mitigated a lot of the problems by the end of that process. And this also speaks to the importance of the development, the process development that just precedes. That's the second button down on my list a little earlier. That is the stage that you really drill into the manufacturability of the vaccine and the ability to mitigate those bottlenecks downstream. In terms of measures to facilitate vaccine manufacturing, you need to have that strong kind of research, that development component. The people that do the manufacturability, understand the yields, develop the assays, the critical assays to release vaccines, test and release vaccines. And interestingly and importantly as well is that regulatory synchronization with regulatory organizations and agencies. And this worked particularly through the COVID pandemic crisis, because there was a kind of an agreement that regulatory agencies would receive on a rolling basis updates from manufacturers, which is not the usual way it's done. The usual way it's done is you might do 10 years of development, submit the package documentation, the regulators review it, and then license your vaccine. That didn't happen with COVID. It was a rolling process, and that was a considerable facilitation of meeting the COVID pandemic demand and supply. I hope that addresses questions in the 2 minutes I was given.
Absolutely. Thank you very much, Matthew, and thank you. So thank you very much, Matthew, and thank you in particular for joining us for this workshop, and we look forward to continued collaborations. Let me now please turn the floor to Mr. Jim Cafone. Mr. Cafone is Vice President for Strategy and Operations Management at Pfizer, and he will share with us his experience on sourcing vaccine inputs, global value chain. So Jim, the floor is yours.
Okay, wonderful. And good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, everybody. Let me share my screen. And let me just, hopefully that's presenting okay. Okay, wonderful. Good morning. Again, good afternoon. I'm delighted to be here. My name is...
Sorry.
Yes.
We're not seeing your full screen. We're seeing the speaker's notes, please.
Oh, I apologize. Is that better?
Terrific. Thank you very much.
Beautiful. My apologies here. So again, good morning, good afternoon, good evening. I'm delighted to be here. Again, my name is Jim Cafone. I'm responsible for the manufacturing and supply chain network design for Pfizer. Just some facts and figures. Pfizer has over 40 internal manufacturing plants, 300 contract manufacturers, and we assemble the 40 internal and the 300 external manufacturers into a tapestry of supply chains that service over 175 markets around the world. What I'm here to talk to you today about is some of the aspects that we worked through as we were going through our own design and development of our manufacturing supply chains for the COVID vaccine. And just like the previous speaker, we utilized the mRNA technology, and I'll talk a little bit about that because that is the newest technology that is now relatively, is prevalent now from us and also Moderna. So if you look at this before we start, I just would state that in pharmaceuticals, we typically design our healthcare supply chains using a balance of 3 different factors. And we ask ourselves a pretty basic question is, are we optimizing for speed? Are we optimizing for service or cost? And we're typically trying to balance all 3 of these, but when you're in the speed region, you typically are looking at, again, lower lead times, you want rapid changeovers, you need manufacturing and supply partners, and also country organizations to really be focused on agility and rapid change. When you're dealing with a service type situation, you typically have much more what I would classify as stable demand. And when you have stable demand that is a lot more predictable, you can put more inventory into your system and you can easily get products to customers in a much, what I would call, less energy type of way. When you're in service type situations of design, you are seeking low cost inputs, but you're also favoring, in some cases, some what I would call service-based upcharges. So in one example would be is in a speed type supply chain, you manufacture very rapidly and you perhaps could overnight express the product to the customer. In a service-based supply chain, you would do the same, but instead of expediting it in 24-hour shipment to perhaps an end customer, you could do that vis-a-vis a couple of days to get to a customer. And then the last but not least is certainly cost-based supply chains. And these are the ones where we, or any industry, basically seeks low-cost manufacturing, logistics, and inputs, and you're running this for maximum output. One thing I should note is many people have said to me, why aren't you also balancing quality? And I always have to reiterate that in our industry, and certainly at Pfizer, quality is non-negotiable, which means that the COVID vaccine that the patient gets in Bangladesh, gets in France, or gets in New York City is the exact same quality. So in our world and in Pfizer, we do not distinguish the quality no matter who the patient is. Every patient in our world is treated equally. So what we did now with the focus on mRNA, I'll have to bring you back to the first quarter of January 2020. We knew that there was a very rapid onset of a pandemic. We also knew that the patient population was most likely going to be in the billions. And we knew that we needed to contribute, and I want to make sure I emphasize the words contribute. We wanted in Pfizer to be able to contribute to this global pandemic in a manner that got to the most patients as we could. So we focused our technology and our supply chains in region 1 here by focusing on speed. And I want to tell you now how we did that. So just like the previous speaker spoke about the varying types of technologies that are utilized for vaccines, the oldest and I'll call it most used technologies is the live attenuated inactive vaccines. What Pfizer chose with our partner BioNTech was to utilize a brand new technology called RNA. And there was a couple of reasons why we did that. And I want to explain why we did that, because that'll then tell you how we assembled the supply chain. So one, with focusing on speed, we needed to be rapid time to market to our patients worldwide. Secondarily is we needed a vaccine that we could produce in the billions. Certain technologies that we have within Pfizer in our vaccine technology are excellent platforms, but we didn't necessarily have the size or scale of the network equipment inside, or nor did our providers, our contract manufacturers outside, have enough stainless steel and enough processing equipment to manufacture something in the billions. So we had a choice to make when we were designing this supply chain for speed. And the first choice is, are we going to go with traditional technology, or are we going to go with an RNA technology? And I'll point you to the upper right of this slide, and I want to talk to you about some of the milestones that went into that. So if you remember, January of 20, the genome was uploaded into the World Wide Web. And that was the first time anybody in the world got the specific molecular buildup of the COVID SARS virus. As soon as we in Pfizer got a look at that, we did what every other company around the world was doing, is we were trying to understand not only what the molecule looked like, what the virus looked like, I should say, but also what is the proper way to build a vaccine for this. And for roughly a few weeks, we were back and forth between traditional technologies and also the new RNA technology. And what we did in March of 20 with our partner BioNTech, we decided that we would move forward with the first in the world vaccine approach for RNA. So that decision process went very rapidly. And then the following month, we initiated clinical trials using the RNA technology. My group in network design, what our task was to build a network, a manufacturing network for the billions, in concert with and in parallel with the phase 1, 2, and 3 studies that were underway. So what we did within our RNA manufacturing, and this is the way that it occurs right here, is you'll see as we start off on the left with DNA, we then transcribe that into RNA. As a previous speaker spoke, we then sterile fill a vial, we pack it, we then place it into cold storage because our vaccine is an ultra cold storage vaccine, and then we ship it to customer. We built this network on speed using 280 different components with 15 unique materials that we source from 86 suppliers over 19 countries from 4 continents. So I want to make sure that everybody realizes the global tapestry of the innovators that we were able to bring together in order to get this vaccine to the market. And we built this manufacturing supply chain in parallel to the April through December clinical trials. And we were successful with launching our first commercial dose in early December of 2020. We started off with 100-day cycle time. We have, over the course of a year, reduced that to 60 days by adding more equipment, by focusing on end-to-end cycle times, by working with our suppliers on expedited deliveries, by working through new and different types of regulatory approaches, anything we could do to focus on speed. Now, it's another thing to note is that our RNA vaccine is also deep frozen. It needs to be stored at roughly -80 Celsius and shipped to the customer at -80. So we also did a tremendous amount of innovation over this time frame to ensure that we had a shipping container that no matter where that product went in the world, could hold that product at -90 degrees Celsius and could do that for up to 10 days and could also be recharged with dry ice. And as I sit and talk to you today, we have 99.99% customer service through 2021. And if you look on the lower right of the right-hand side, we manufactured and shipped 3 billion doses, and 1 billion of those went to low and middle income countries. Now, when I say focus on speed, the way that we did that is we could have optimized around service, and we could have optimized around a more lengthy time to market. There was a lot of debate during the first quarter of January 20 and the second quarter of January of 20 as whether we should actually come out with a ultra low cold temperature vaccine. And what we said was, for time to market and to get to the most amount of patients globally, we committed to doing that. And that's the product that we came out to market with. And that has been the one that has been the most, at this point in time, administered in the world. So you're probably asking now is, what do we do for speed and how each one of you can help? Because as you see from our supply chain and the tapestry of innovators that we have within this across our 86 suppliers, it is very, very difficult, if not impossible, to pull this off without countries, continents, and suppliers from all over the world working in constant collaboration with the one design for speed for the patients. And the way that I would sort of say this is, the three things I'm going to talk to you about now are what I classify as very simple, just not easy. So let me describe to you what they are. The first thing that we work for and we look for when we're designing any supply chain, and it doesn't have to be an RNA technology, it could be an antibiotic that gets prescribed for river blindness in Africa, is we look for global innovative partners. And those innovative partners, they want policies that are supported, government policies that support innovation. They're also looking for, as our previous speaker said, intellectual property, technology transfer type protections, okay? The second thing we need when we were looking for this, and the types of innovative partners we needed, was ones that were in areas of the world that had open trade. We did not want to do all of our work to get a vaccine across this supply chain to the customer and do our part in 60 days, only to have that vaccine sit at an entryway or at a port or at a, let's call it a hospital situation where it couldn't be administered. And then that brings me lastly to country readiness. The third simple, not easy element is how various countries can build local logistics, ultra cold chain storage that we helped many countries set forth and put in place, and how also that the other aspect was a trained and resilient healthcare system. So these are the three things that if you want to optimize around a patient, and it doesn't have to be a pandemic, it could be any disease state that's in your country. It's, again, these three elements that we believe are critical, and these are the three elements that we build our supply chains to. Let me give you a good example then, and then I'll close out my discussion of a country that we were working with. And this is the graph that I like to utilize. And what this shows is time to patients, cycle time to patients, how quick that patient can get a therapy, to what is the effort for us or for providers to get that therapy into the patient. And in some cases, it's a long period of time to get it and a lot of effort. And what we do is we have our own ranking of different locations, country combinations that are exceptionally easy to get a patient their therapy to ones that it is exceptionally difficult. So what we did is our part. The first thing we did is when we first started, I talked about 110-day time to patient, and we started to move the curve in. We reduced our cycle time within those that manufacturing network by 50%. We partnered with a tremendous amount of global suppliers to build up scale. We focused those partners on the mission of patients and the mission of speed in a pandemic. We selected all of these partners based on quality, compliance, their own technical ability, and the location of where they are and how easily that they could manufacture our product and our intellectual property and how quickly that they could get it to their patients. And then we digitized and operated this entire network for speed. You can consider this network built like an F1 race car. We then started to work with countries, and I'm going to give you an example of one country that I'm not going to name, but they're always a pleasure to deal with. And what we have to remember is this was a country originally that had very rigid, specific country labels, only wanted local production, and typically always had extended customs delays. And we worked with them specifically over this time period in a manner that we allowed for, that they agreed to take a global standard label. They allowed for expedited regulatory, both on a customs and a healthcare perspective. When we landed the product was in the green lane. We had freezer farms and they had their country healthcare system ready. So within a matter of a week, they literally went from the upper right to the lower left. And instead of getting there, instead of us landing the product in 60 days and having it in the country sit for 2025, they then were able to get it into arms exceptionally rapid. So the last thing I'll leave you with, and then I'll turn it over for questions, is how you can help your patients. Is that when I talk to different countries and healthcare organizations, it's very easy to know whether you're in the red zone or the green zone. And it all is about what is the effort and what is the time to service your patients. And my advice is, if you're in the red zone, then do everything you can to get in the green, using those 3 elements I said earlier. And if you're in the green, please stay there. There's no reason that we should not use this pandemic as a good thing to do to help make sure that healthcare is delivered in new and innovative ways as we move forward in the world. So I'll stop for questions now, and thank you very much for the opportunity again.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Jim, for a very interesting presentation. And I think a very compelling case, to understand the important role that trade can play in supporting both vaccine manufacturing and distribution. So we've already started to get questions for you, but if I may, we will take them in the Q&A session. And we will move now to our session on the regulatory dimension. Of course, another very important element in the vaccine supply chain. So we have 3 guest speakers who will share their personal experience, their practical experience. And let me start with Carmen Rodriguez Hernandez from the World Health Organization. Carmen, the floor is yours.
Thank you, and well, I would like to start saying that thank you for inviting me to present in this workshop that is really relevant, and also to the organizers of this meeting to share my presentation. So while the presentation is uploaded in the screen, I just want to introduce myself. I am working in the vaccine pre-qualification and leading the team, and also I am leading the activities on the emergency use listing. That is a requirement for supply vaccines at the low middle income country level. I just want to start with, next slide, please. I just want to start with what we do in WHO in the regulation and pre-qualification department. So we have pre-qualification system for vaccine, medicine, vector control, and in vitro diagnostics. We have people working in strengthening the regulatory capacity, local production and assistance, and also a group working on risk management and safety. And everything is to ensure that we have quality assured and equitable products, and that these products will be available in low middle income countries. Next slide, please. These are the regulation and pre-qualification strategy priorities, and then you can see that the first one is strengthen country and regional regulatory system, improve regulatory preparedness for public health emergency, and this is very connected with the work that we are doing on the COVID-19 vaccines, reinforce and expand the WHO pre-qualification and also other product risk assessment, and increase the impact of WHO regulatory support activities. Next slide. Before talking about what we have done to address the pandemic situation, I just want to remind that in WHO we have two processes. One is the pre-qualification that was developed in 1987, and the main objective of the pre-qualification is to provide an advice to UN procuring agencies on the quality, safety, and efficacy of the vaccine. The other value of the work that we do is that we ensure that vaccines supplied through UN agencies are meeting a certain the programmatic suitability criteria that not necessarily is overseen by some regulatory authorities. We developed in 2015, following the Ebola outbreaks, the emergency use listing, and just to indicate that this is a risk-benefit assessment of essential set of quality, safety, and efficacy data for products to be used during a public health emergency. It is based on a rolling review of data. And there are some features that are the same as for the pre-qualification, because we do a reliance on listed authorities to follow the abbreviated process. And in the case of the emergency use listing products, then we need to monitor the performance of the vaccine from the quality, safety, programmatic once the vaccines are deployed. This is a time-limited recommendation, and development should continue to get the marketing authorization and pre-qualification. Next slide, please. When the pandemic started in 2020, we started doing a lot of preparedness activities. Then the first one that we released a document for assessing COVID-19 vaccines, that this document outlines the minimal criteria that we need to assess those vaccines. And also we issue a call for expression of interest that manufacturers could submit to WHO COVID-19 vaccines. Next one, please. Next one. Okay, this, after we assess the vaccines, then we need to facilitate access of the vaccine in low middle income countries. We need to facilitate regulatory approval by those countries. And we started establishing a mechanism to facilitate and expedite the regulatory approvals or waivers to ensure that the vaccines were available in the shortest manner. So before, I think that in the first presentation, during the opening, it was mentioned about, and other speakers, it was mentioned about the global coordination between different partners. And this is critical. And when the pandemic started, we started developing strategies to discuss with different regulatory authorities and for ensuring an expedited approval by countries. We launched the expression of interest and also discussed with manufacturers their approach for rolling submission data. And we established the assessment pathway depending on the national regulatory authority or stringent regulatory authority in charge of the oversight. And we established the review committee where we involve the regulatory authorities involved on the authorization of the vaccines, and also we involve regulatory authorities at the global level in the assessment of the data that will expedite the regulatory authorization in those countries. Then, after the approval by the relevant authorities, we created an advisory committee that they will review the assessment done by the regulatory experts and will provide a recommendation to WHO on whether we could list the vaccines under the emergency use listing and under which conditions. Very critical, because the vaccines, the vaccines were still under development, is to implement post-listing monitoring activities, specifically a strategy for safety, quality, and effectiveness monitoring, validity of the listing based on new data generated. And as I indicated, there is a possibility to convert the emergency use listing to pre-qualification. For vaccines that were supplied through the COVAX mechanism, we facilitated and we asked countries to rely first on the assessment done by the relevant authority of reference and also to rely on the emergency use listing. This was, let's say, a little bit easier because we involve countries from different regions at the global level, and we involve what we call like a type of champions in each of the regions to that other countries in the region could assess if the vaccine has been authorized in those countries. And something that we did because it was impossible that or not feasible that the manufacturers submit a regulatory dossier at the global level, we facilitated the process. We shared after the agreement from manufacturers and also discussion with relevant regulatory authorities. We shared the data, we shared the assessment, the inspection, the law release data with those countries, and that facilitated very much the approval of those vaccines. Next one, please. Next one. Okay, I don't expect that you see this slide. I cannot even read the slide. The intention to have this slide there so you can see the timeline of events that happened since the pandemic was declared in 2020. And in each of the boxes, you have different links that you can check more information about that. Next slide, please. This is a summary of the regulatory authorizations that were facilitated by WHO in more than 150 low middle income countries and territories. And then you have the vaccine, manufacturers to expand the capacity for supply. They started adding new manufacturing sites. They started doing some variations, and this is something that we also facilitated. So you can see there in each of the vaccines that we have listed, what we have done on the drug substance manufacturing sites and also on the drug product sites that are the information each shared with each of the countries requiring support and facilitating the regulatory approval. Next one, please. I think that this is my last slide. I just wanted to highlight that we are now facing the issue of the variants. Now we are with the Omicron, and as I indicated, there should be a cooperation global cooperation between different partners to ensure that we have the measures to have access and developing policy or research and development. So you can see there all the working groups that are organized by WHO and to ensure that we have vaccines available so that we develop the policies, and also the R&D blueprint is very important and to ensure that we have the data and we facilitate that from the regulatory perspective in low middle income countries. I think that this is my last slide, and then probably I will wait until the questions and answer session over from my side.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Carmen, for a very interesting presentation. Let me now turn to Preeti Shah from AstraZeneca. Preeti, please go ahead.
Hi, everyone. It's been a pleasure to be here. I'm hoping that the team is going to share my slides. Great. So thank you very much. So good afternoon, good morning, and good evening to everyone. It's really a pleasure to be here today to talk about our experience with the registration of Vaxzevria around the world. My name is Preeti Shah, and I lead the International Regulatory Affairs team at AstraZeneca. Really, I want to show you what we've achieved with the vaccine. So through the great collaboration with regulatory authorities around the world, and you've just heard from Carmen from WHO and governments, we've made great strides in the regulatory process, making Vaxzevria our quickest filing and approval in AstraZeneca history. We worked together in partnership with the authorities. So we held over 200 health authority meetings with international authorities around the world, taking them through our data, our strategy, what data was available and when. And this close collaboration and planning of what we are filing was a true partnership. We really, truly, what we thought was impossible with registering Vaxzevria became possible. And some of the ways of working and collaboration that we saw, we would really like to see introduced into permanent regulatory frameworks in the future. So as I talk through what we achieved, our aim was to get the vaccine registered as quickly as possible so patients got access to the vaccine simultaneously. And really what we did was we filed the same package that we filed to Europe, US, to WHO and to various rest of the world authorities, so that all of these authorities had the same information at the same time and that they could collaborate and work together to assess the quality, safety and effectiveness of the product. The data was filed as it was received, so on a rolling basis. This did complicate things because different authorities were always at different stages of review, but we wanted to submit the data as quickly as we possibly could at that stage of the pandemic. And what this resulted for us is 126 licenses. 90 of those licenses were actually received within a very short time frame of submission, so within 6 to 9 months. WHO, our first EUL, we saw regulatory authorities collaborating. So WHO and MFDS, the authority in South Korea, collaborated very closely for our first WHO EUL. And we know that MFDS also collaborated with the EMA. And we know authorities like the MHRA in the UK collaborated with India, Brazil, Australia, and other countries around the world. So you could see that the regulators were collaborating, industry was collaborating, and we were all working together. For the low and middle income countries, which were due to be supplied via COVAX, we worked with WHO and we used their sharing platform, which Carmen has talked about. So what that really meant for us and for regulators around the world is that we filed one dossier to WHO. That included making available the questions, the responses, the assessment reports that we had submitted. And this meant that we didn't have to file separate applications in over 100 markets to support that COVAX supply. Those regulators could get that dossier and all of the information from the WHO portal. And so that one dossier actually resulted in 6 EULs for us. I mean, with different packages of data because we had different regional supply chains, but really we worked with WHO to get 6 emergency use licenses with differing national agencies of record and supervising authorities, because we were manufacturing in different regions of the world to allow us to supply as quickly as possible. And on top of this, we work very closely with our partner, the Serum Institute of India. So in total, we have 7 EULs for our vaccines, for the one vaccine. And our first WHO EUL was based on manufacturing in South Korea, and that was issued in February of 2021. So very short timelines for approval. So what these registrations have resulted in are we've been able to supply 2.6 billion doses of our vaccine to over 170 markets around the world. And 2/3 of the doses have been supplied to low and middle income countries. 27% of all of the COVAX doses have been with the AstraZeneca vaccine. So we've achieved what we thought was impossible. If you can go to the next slide, please. So our approach really was to provide access to our vaccine all around the world was really via establishing regional supply chains. And the WHO approvals of these chains, these supply chains have been complex, but it's resulted in what I said, the 7 emergency use license. And really those 7 emergency use licenses have been critical to acceptance of the vaccines globally, to reduce vaccine hesitancy, but also to overcome the issue around the vaccine passport. So really, what we faced for a short period of time was we had all of these supply chains, but not all of them were registered with WHO. And when they weren't registered with WHO, we had an issue with with authorities accepting them as a vaccine in that country and allowing travel to happen. So we decided to register everything with WHO to allow that acceptance. And the WHO emergency use license has really been, the driving force in acceptance by governments of all of our different regional manufacturing sites. And that means that those supplies are globally recognized. So whether we've manufactured in Thailand or Australia or in Europe, actually the vaccine is recognized by all governments around the world, which is really critical for us and really helped address the issue of vaccine hesitancy. One of the strategies we used, if you can go to the next slide, sorry. So I want to just talk through one of the strategies we used to ensure we could supply as quickly as possible. So we used an e-labeling approach. So what we have is one pack that could go anywhere in the world. So it's a one pack strategy. And what we used to ensure patients and healthcare professionals had the right information in the right language at the right time, we used an e-labeling initiative. So we had a QR code that took you to a website that took you to the leaflet in your local language. And what that meant for us is that it helped speed up supply, but it also allowed supply flexibility. So the same pack could go to multiple markets. And it was a much more sustainable approach. So if you look on the slides, you can see the amount of paper we saved, the number of leaflets that we saved, and the cost. So not only does it help speed and supply flexibility, but it helps the environment from a sustainability issue as well. And critically, as the world was vaccinating, we were seeing, lots of vaccinations around the world, and so we were seeing updated safety information being put into our labels very quickly. And what that meant is that actually the e-label meant that healthcare professionals and patients had immediate access to the current information that was available on safety and efficacy versus a paper leaflet that would be out of date very quickly. So what we'd like to use this sort of for many more of our products to help, so even outside of the pandemic, because I think it's a win-win for everybody. And then if you go to the next slide, which I think is my last slide. So really, I sort of split this up into 3 buckets. So what can we do in the future? The first bucket really relates to harmonization of requirements. And although we had the WHO approval, this actually only applied to COVAX supply. Where we had direct government contracts, we needed another approval. And that approval often was issued with a different label to the COVAX label. So a different sort of information leaflet with different information. And really, I suppose one of the questions was, it is the same product that has been assessed by WHO and a supervisory authority. And so what we would want to do is we would want to encourage future harmonization and have that recognition of the WHO approval as an administrative step to issue a national license, so that regulators can focus their resource on other things during the emergency. They've already, WHO's assessed it, a national reference authority has assessed it. The sovereign nation assessing it again actually introduces more complexity. So further harmonization than there. Many authorities don't or didn't have an established criteria for converting from when you had an emergency use license to a full marketing authorization application. And these differ quite significantly per country. So the harmonization of when we convert from an emergency use to a marketing authorization, or even the criteria that is used to determine when it becomes, when it goes from being emergency use to normal use, would be useful to stop the divergence across authorities. And, WHO obviously has an EUL process, but it also has a PQ process. And one of the questions is, could WHO PQ be used as a medium to determine when something becomes emergency use to full license? The second bucket is really around capability build. So what we did as AstraZeneca is that we had multiple supply chains in regions. So really, what we wanted to do is ensure that the world could access, anywhere in the world, you could access our vaccine. And what we've been discussing with governments is a more sustainable approach. So governments want to have local manufacturing capacity. So in case there's another pandemic or an emergency, they want to have the capability in country to manufacture. A lot of these countries, however, don't have the maturity level to be recognized as a national authority of record, and therefore a capability build is required. And why I say that is, even though it might be for their local market only, actually global acceptance of that vaccine and what we saw with the vaccine passport would become an issue if it wasn't a recognized authority of record. And then the last thing is around technology, and really what can we do with respect to technology? So what I talked to you about from e-labeling went a long way, but could there be another way for us to manage, for example, shelf lives on packs? So as new data is coming out from stability, could it becomes really hard to relabel packs that you've already labeled. And so in the US, for example, what they have is a shelf life lookup. So you don't put the expiry date on your carton or your vial. You have a lookup onto a website and you put your batch, it has your batch number and what the shelf life would be. So is there something like that that we can use so that as more data becomes available, we could implement that shelf life as quickly as possible? And the use of more technology, ideally, the vision is that we should be able to file to all countries at the touch of a button, and sort of future collaboration between authorities, sharing assessment reports, sharing questions would make things easier for both the authorities and industry, and at the end of the day, get an approval earlier. So is there a way we can use technology to collaborate and share more? So just to end my talk, I think we've made great progress around the regulatory front, and all of the collaboration that we've seen, the working together, the flexibilities, rolling reviews, technology, e-labeling. It's been really great to see all of that coming together to get the vaccine to countries that needed it. I suppose my last comment is really, it would be great if we could put some of those into permanent regulatory frameworks, because we will have lots of opportunities to make things even easier for the next emergency, or for future products where there is unmet medical need.
Thank you.
So I'll end my talk there. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Preeti. It's interesting to see how side by side, from the innovations happening in the scientific and manufacturing side, there are also innovations on the regulatory dimension. Let me now offer the floor to Dr. Henrietta Ukwu from Novavax. Dr. Ukwu, you have the floor, please.
Thank you very much, Annabelle, and thank you to the World Trade Organization for this incredibly important meeting. And thank you for inviting me to be one of the panelists today and actively participate in this very important meeting. I'd like to also use this opportunity to thank the entire Novavax teams across the globe for making it possible, actually, for me to be able to speak on behalf of us today about the Novavax COVID-19 vaccine. We are the newest kid on the block, I think, and I will use my time today to highlight some of the critical milestones that we enjoyed, and also use this opportunity to recognize the incredible collaboration and partnership with regulatory authorities and WHO in a manner that we all believe should become part of the regulatory framework as we go forward. So let me start by introducing the Novavax vaccine. It is of the recombinant protein vaccine technology. It is a well understood technology, and it is formulated as particles with the matrix adjuvant. The matrix adjuvant is a saponin-based adjuvant and has been used with a broad range of vaccine antigens in clinical trials. So if we go into the next slide, please. The recombinant technology, as I mentioned already, is a well understood technology. It has been used for various other vaccines, as highlighted also in Matthew's opening segment, Matthew from CEPI. This recombinant technology has been used for influenza vaccines, hepatitis B vaccines, human papillomavirus vaccine, meningitis B, and shingles. Likewise, as I've already mentioned, the Matrix M adjuvant has been used with a broad range of antigens, as you can see on this slide, in clinical trials and certainly in the COVID-19 vaccine that Novavax has manufactured. Our vaccine is dispensed in 10-dose vials, preservative-free, and is transported and stored at a stable temperature, refrigerator stable storage temperature 2 to 8 degrees Celsius. This obviously makes it readily accessible and easy to ship, to transport, to store, and to reach and permeate the globe where we have limitations or constraints with cold chain. It is administered as a 5 microgram antigen dose and a 50 microgram Matrix M formulated as the drug product, and given as 2 doses of half meal, given intramuscularly, just very standard for many vaccines. Our current indication is for adults 18 years of age and older, and we continue our clinical program to establish additional indications, both for pediatric adolescents and booster use. Next slide, please. This slide basically provides a very, very broad stroke overview of the clinical development program that supported the authorization for use for this vaccine. I'll just focus on the first 2 well-controlled clinical trials, efficacy trials, the US-Mexico phase 3 trial to support the registration in the US, and the UK phase 3 trial. And both of them generated very consistent vaccine efficacy at 90% and beyond. Next slide, please. I'm mindful of time. Now, this slide basically attempts to project the end-to-end segments of the manufacturing activities. And I think that our CEPI colleague, Matthew, earlier highlighted these steps also in his presentation. And this is to convey the complexity and what it takes to actually get a vaccine from the research stage to actual distribution and dose in arm. So our program sits on a preclinical program and the 2 phase 3 trials, as well as additional phase 2 and phase 1 studies that were done earlier. The manufacturing activities went through a level of rigorous and very complex assessment, from analytical methods to assess and establish the release tests with potency and purity, the stability data to support the shelf life, and the expiry period for use for this vaccine at the time of approval. And of course, that program continues so that it allows and enables extension of the shelf life in the course of the life cycle of the product. Comparability assessment, as we used different network and supply sites. As we can see from the presentation from our colleague from Pfizer, a manufacturing network is needed. A tapestry of network is needed to be able to provide vaccine enough to supply the globe and in this pandemic. And then the last piece of my slide, I can't quite see from this projection, sorry, I think I moved too fast, really talks about the characterization work as well as the consistency and the PPQ, the process validation that needs to occur. I'm actually looking at a different slide. If you could take me back to, yes, thank you. And then finally, the facilities, all the description, the inspections that occur to establish the GMP status of these facilities, the release testings, and also the plan to add additional supply nodes to the authorization profile. So this is sort of a broad schematic to represent a very complex and rigorous activity that come together from research, discovery, clinical development, all of the chemistry, manufacturing controls, facilities, storage conditions, as well as packaging and labeling for distribution of vaccines. Next slide, please. So here is a slide that recognizes our footprint. The Novavax team, as well as our external and key collaborators, we have partners, we have licensees that we have come together and worked together and grown together in this process in the last 1.5 years to get the Novavax vaccine to the authorization level where we are right now. It's color-coded, so the dark blue or black represents the core footprint of our Novavax team. We are in strong partnership with our partners and licensee, Serum Institute of India. You can see that highlighted in the mustard color. We do have colleagues from PPD as CRO that have supported some of our activities with the clinical development and operational clinical sites operations, as well as our regulatory publishing in the various footprints of our interactions with regulatory authorities. We have our S-Cubed team on the UK footprint, Takeda colleagues and partners and licensee that are the liaison and strategists with PMDA, Japan Regulatory Authority. Then SK Bioscience, that is also the partners and licensee for the South Korea MFDS interactions, and BioSelect, that's on our Australian footprint, and our liaison for both Australia TGA and New Zealand MedSafe. Next slide, please. So at the time that we culminated all of the development and manufacturing efforts into a complete filing, we were able to hit our global filing timetable and time frame towards the end of last year in the fourth quarter of 2021. And you can see from this slide, very, very high level, what the file basically constituted of the Matrix M adjuvant produced from Novavax Sweden, as well as a drug substance from Serum, drug product from Serum, testing and release testings from manufacturing sites at Serum, the filing from Novavax, and we were able to file simultaneously and near simultaneously to all of the regulatory agencies, stringent regulatory authorities, as well as our WHO for EUL and other filings that I will show on the next couple slides with our licensees and partners, Takeda and SK Bio and Serum. Next slide, please. So this is one of those, oh my God, or eye charts, very similar to what Carmen had on her slide. This really is where I'd like to spend a little bit of time, really to recognize the rigorous engagement and collaboration that we enjoyed with global regulatory authorities and the transparency that we put forward. We did have and enjoy the rolling submission. So as data became available, we were able to make these submissions to the regulatory authorities. The top of this slide, I call this the arrow slide. So right in the middle line is a timetable. Above the timetable or the arrow slides, we represent the many regulatory submissions and the various regulatory agencies are color-coded. And at the bottom of this slide, we represent the multiple engagements with regulatory authorities. And where you have the long bars, we were having weekly cadence or bi-weekly cadence with regulatory agencies, as well as monthly cadence with regulatory agencies. There was also a lot of collaboration. For instance, with EMA, we had what I call the tripartite meetings with WHO and TGA at the same time. We also recognized in our various communications that the many regulatory agencies were completely in communication with each other. We shared the communication that we got from some regulatory agencies with all of the agencies that we were working with. And as we get into the filing itself, and when we started receiving the queries and our responses to our regulatory agencies, we were also sharing them to be preemptive and also to be proactive and transparent with the information that was being shared across. So extreme collaboration and a lot of access to our regulatory agencies. And this is certainly a best practice, a good practice that we would like to see as part of the regulatory framework. There's a lot of partnership and solutions-oriented approaches in our engagement with the regulatory authorities. So I'd like to use this opportunity to say a big thank you to all of the regulatory agencies and WHO in working so closely with us and helping to guide us along this path. Next slide, please. So this flag slide basically captures where we have activities ongoing and where we have received authorizations, approvals, and where we've completed our submissions. And there are more beyond this slide, but this really captures the major activities that we embarked on with those global filings that ensued in October, November of last year. So we have received the authorization from EMA, from the emergency use listing from World Health Organization, from UK MHRA, South Korea, New Zealand, and Australia. We also have the authorizations from India, DCGI, Philippines, and Indonesia, driven by our partners from Serum Institute. And the WHO EUL activity was a shared and uniform harmonized review with our partners from Serum. We have active submissions with Japan PMDA, driven by our licensee Takeda, as well as from the ongoing and very active reviews with Health Canada, Singapore, and UAE, as well as the EUA request that has been submitted to the FDA. Next slide. I can see Annabelle, so I guess my time is almost up. This is my last slide, and I wanted to just give a showing of what the Novavax packaging does look like. And we have the first batch completed January of this year and are actively in the distribution efforts. And I think we can recognize the challenges in the distribution efforts to get this product dose in arm around the world. So with this, I'd like to stop, and I'm sure the Q&A will be coming later. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Henrietta, for a very interesting presentation. If I have a takeaway from this session on the regulatory dimension, is that partnerships and collaboration are absolutely critical to increase efficiency. So thanks to our three participants, and let me now move to the session on distributing vaccines globally. And I would like to invite Jean-Pierre Amorish from UNICEF to take the floor. Jean-Pierre, please.
Thank you for having this opportunity to present here on the vaccine procurement and distribution of vaccines. I hope you will see my screen. Here it goes. So I will present on the vaccine procurement and distribution practice. UNICEF is applying for more than two decades. It's important to acknowledge that vaccine products have multiple important characteristics. Vaccines have a high product sensitivity. They are biological products that require constant temperature control. There are significant risks related to production failures. Sorry. Including the limited shelf life, so they need to be proper handled. Furthermore, they are in a highly regulated production environment. There is necessity for strong national regulatory agencies, which are responsible for ensuring that products released for public distribution are evaluated properly and meet international standards of quality and safety. There is a limited supply within the market in general for vaccines, especially for the non-COVID vaccines and the COVID vaccines nowadays, which means that normally there are only 1 to 5 suppliers per product. Good planning is necessary, and especially this relates to vaccine production that requires long lead time. And here there are a few examples in a normal situation that the production of a dose may take 6 to 24 months. Capacity increase can require 2 to 3 years, whereas a full new plant may take 5 to 7 years, with a lot of regulatory requirements that may cause interruption. So because of all these factors, there is a need for a specific approach to be developed for vaccine procurement. The overall objective of UNICEF Vaccine Center is to achieve vaccine security, which is the sustained, uninterrupted supply of affordable vaccines of assured quality. There are 3 main components of this approach: availability of funding, accurate forecasting, and appropriate contracting. UNICEF strives to implement the vaccine security approach, which includes achieving value for money and access to vaccines for children in need. And in the case of COVID, access to vaccines to interrupt any emergency. Securing healthy markets to achieve affordability, availability of products, and programmatic effectiveness. Ensuring the unique requirements of vaccines, as biological products are included in our strategic vaccine procurement approach. For example, given the time it takes to a vaccine to be produced, we need to ensure the forecasting process is managed in a way that allows us the ability to give our suppliers visibility on the next several years. Working with suppliers to maintain the quality of vaccines through pre-qualification by WHO, which ensures the acceptability in principle, as well as quality, safety, and efficacy in the target population of the procured vaccines. This is an overview of UNICEF vaccine procurement principles. The point I would like to highlight here is that UNICEF vaccine procurement is based on multi-year demand forecasting with countries in general. This allows UNICEF to signal to vaccine industry the upcoming needs by providing accurate and long-term forecasts to vaccine manufacturers. From vaccine manufacturers, we ask to provide accurate and long-term production plans. This will provide us visibility in the potential supply availability for the upcoming country needs. For vaccine contracting, we have an approach that includes a procurement strategy, a tender and award process resulting in long-term agreements, and the final supply operations to fine-tune supply demand and supply availability. Key for this is, aside of the multi-year planning, that we also work towards multi-year contracts. LTAs, long-term agreements with vaccine suppliers and freight forwarders, as well as with vendors of immunization supporting commodities such as syringes and safety boxes, are here key. This is just an overview of the purchasing power of UNICEF Vaccine Center. This is most of this is from the non-COVID context. So UNICEF represents only 5% of the vaccine market share. However, through UNICEF reach, it's about 45% of the world's children's population. And in 2020, UNICEF procured 1.9 billion doses of vaccines, worth $1.4 billion US. This included shipments of around 2,400 deliveries to over 100 receiving countries. This is done with a portfolio of around 25 vaccine groups. At the supply side, in terms of volume, half of our vaccines are sourced from manufacturers from developing and industrialized countries, whereas half are from developing countries. In terms of USD value, 2/3 is sourced from industrialized countries' vaccine manufacturers. In contrast to other commodities, products that are less thermosensitive, vaccines are always shipped by air. For vaccine delivery, appropriate planning and monitoring and fine-tuning of timing is important. This includes detailed planning with countries to be ready to receive forecasted vaccines, supply planning with vaccine manufacturers, and planning with contracted freight forwarders for pickup of the vaccine, and air shipment from the supplier's nearest airport. This is an overview of the vaccine shipping and logistics performed in 2020. Most important take is that the supplier and forwarder have a direct relationship. These responsibilities are outlined in the UNICEF contracts, LTAs, both with the supplier as well as with the freight forwarder. And this results in standard operating procedures between the supplier and the respective freight forwarder for the pickup of the product. The UNICEF team is just a facilitator in the deliveries and only really intervenes when that's really necessary. And that relates to large complex orders, split orders, green lights, outbreaks, risk orders, emergencies, and as well as booking specific charters for the supplies. An important point to highlight is that also custom clearance at the port of entry is key. Standardly, it will take around 5 days, but sometimes it requires 2 weeks because of additional documentation requirements. I would like to highlight a few, let's say, non-standard destinations. Most destinations allow shipping with commercial flights. So flights which are also used for other purposes to fly persons. There are a few special destinations that require crossing borders by trucks after the flight, local forwarding contracts, or booking of specific charters for the load due to the capacity constraints for these larger deliveries. A special destination I would to highlight further is Yemen. Due to ongoing military operation, the Yemen airspace is controlled by Saudi Arabia. In order to use a limited approved airspace window, we make use of a charter operation from Nairobi. We consolidate supply from multiple origins, multiple different vaccines in Nairobi. This in order to make efficient use of the charter operations and the airspace window. One of the challenges we need to manage here is that vaccines are monitored by temperature, monitoring devices that may have a maximum recording time of for example, 20 days. So delays in approvals may delay delivery and create a risk for quality assurance of these thermosensitive vaccines. Some short highlight on the most recent work we are doing with the COVAX partnership. Here you see a delivery overview. In approximately 1 year, UNICEF has delivered more than 1.1 billion doses of COVID vaccines to 144 countries. In addition to this, more than 900 million syringes have been shipped to countries to enable immunization with COVID vaccines. If we consider the volume of all these COVAX vaccines delivered and compare that with the volume of UNICEF's 2020 total vaccine deliveries of non-COVID vaccines, which was only 1.9 billion doses, you can conclude that the COVAX deliveries are of enormous scale. And the last slide, I want to highlight that, vaccine deliveries over the last months have really reached a new scale. With that, I would like to thank you for your attention and happy to take any questions at the end of the day. Over.
Thank you very much, Jean-Pierre. It is really an impressive logistics operation that UNICEF has conducted. And the private sector, of course, has played a critical role as well. So now let me turn it over to Carlos Enrique Montes from DHL. Carlos, please, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, Deputy Director General Gonzalez, and we are very grateful to the WTO for this incredible opportunity. And first, I would like to commend WTO members for allowing this dialogue, and also to congratulate the WTO Secretariat for the incredible work and the effort you have been leading throughout this pandemic challenge. So as you will see, today we're going to talk about the lessons learned from a logistics perspective. And it is not a surprise that COVID-19 challenged all of us and that we had to adapt very quickly. And actually, we have all been adapting to this situation, and the fact that we are able to meet through these means today is part of this adaptation, right? So in the case of the supply chain for the COVID-19 vaccine distribution, also we faced many different challenges. It was not only us, but it was actually all the key players in the supply chain that were facing these very significant challenges. So when the development of the first COVID-19 vaccines came, the first big challenge was how to distribute an important amount of doses that were required. So as you see here in the slide, only in 2021, it was estimated that there were required around 10 billion doses, and unfortunately, this is not over. So as we have seen, we still have to continue with this distribution, and the estimates that we have is that we are going to continue requiring a significant amount of doses. We are estimating between 7 and 9 billion doses for 2022, and also in the following years. An additional challenge that has been already mentioned several times today is the very strict cold chain storage requirements that the vaccines require, some of them requiring storage on -20 degrees Celsius. And this brings us to another challenge, which is we definitely need trade facilitation measures in place to be able to assure supply chain effectiveness. And the other important thing is that we had, when the COVID-19 vaccines came, we already had the experience from the beginning of the outbreak, basically with the distribution of PPE and other related materials and the challenges that we faced. So we had to leverage from these lessons also to improve and be more effective in delivering the vaccines. And actually, this was the case for many countries who actually implemented the measures, warranting the efficient and expedited import of the vaccines by removing both tariff and non-tariff barriers. One thing that has been mentioned as well today, and I really want to highlight, is that government authorities play a key role to ensure efficient and effective delivery of vaccines, and not only the government authorities, but also the international organizations. So trade regulatory and enforcement agencies, they face the challenge. On the one hand, they have to ensure safety and security, of course, from the population, but also from their own government officials. But at the same time, they have to guarantee and expedite clearance of goods. And a great example of this is what the WTO and the WCO, what they made. They created dedicated websites, raising awareness and assisting the authorities and the different stakeholders on what were the different measures that were effective in terms of facilitating the export and the import of the vaccines and all the related products. And I would say that the good thing about this is that many of the steps are already covered by international instruments and tools. So one example, of course, is the Trade Facilitation Agreement, but then you also have the standards from the WCO, like the revised Kyoto Convention, or also the immediate release guidelines. And in these international instruments, you already have available a different set of standards that include some of the following, the ones that I have here in the slide, like pre-arrival processing and clearance, which is crucial. And this is through the use of advanced electronic data, the use of digital risk-based customs clearance. This allows both to expedite the clearance, but also to minimize human contact, therefore protecting the health of the different agents. You, of course, have coordinated border management, which is something that you Deputy Director General have highlighted several times the importance of coordination between the different government agencies, also to exempt from export restrictions, fiscal charges, regulatory procedures, and something else that is critical is stakeholder engagement. And here, for example, the engagement of the World Health Organization and of ICC, it was crucial, from doing very concrete things like identifying which were the essential goods that were necessary for addressing the pandemic challenge. Another key recommendation was setting up central task forces where you would have all the different players, both public and private, involved in allowing the best possible solutions. And as you can imagine, the distribution of the vaccines is not easy. It requires knowledge. It requires great experience. And we in DHL, we have long experience and dedicated capabilities in logistics for life science and healthcare goods. And even then, we had to upgrade in several areas. And this was in order to really address properly the big challenge of COVID-19. So by upgrading and all the experience and the knowledge that we have, this is really what allowed us to become a trusted partner for the COVID-19 vaccine distribution. And with these capabilities, we were able to serve all continents, also to distribute all the approved vaccines, all related products, to provide end-to-end solutions, also to be able to comply with the very strict controlled temperatures, also providing real-time tracking, which is something that it was mentioned by some of the previous speakers, which is crucial so that you can ensure not only the quality of the vaccines, but also to ensure full transparency of the full procedure, and of course to ensure the highest security. And then here you have some of the key contributions that we have achieved so far. And I think I would start from the bottom. As I mentioned, we upgraded our services. So we introduced 10 new dedicated services. We established 50 collaborations with the pharma and the public sector. 350 facilities were involved in the process. And this allows us to serve so far 175 countries, and actually to be able to distribute right now over 2 billion doses. So this takes me to showing you some of the key lessons that we have learned from the logistics perspective. And the first big lesson that we have is that the data that we have compiled is that with regards to the COVID-19 vaccines, we have seen no major challenges or delays in the clearance of the goods. And this is basically because most of the shipments were already pre-cleared, cleared before they even arrived. So when they arrived at the border, they were released immediately. There was an incredibly well-coordinated logistic effort between all the different stakeholders. There was a big regulatory engagement. And of course, there was very high visibility around the vaccines, and the importance of having on time the vaccines was crucial. So we didn't face these major challenges. However, and I think it was also mentioned by one of the previous speakers, we have to highlight that a short-term adaptation of border management processes is not sufficient. So the measures, it is important to maintain them where they have proved to be efficient. Another lesson is that there has been no globally or even regionally standardized and harmonized border processes. So this complicates things, and this it puts us in a situation that it's us that we have to develop specific standard operating procedures by each country, because we have to ensure that the level of quality, the level of service is always the same. And the last lesson that I want to share with you is that unfortunately, unlike the COVID-19 vaccines, with regards to other very necessary products and ancillary supplies like needles, dilutes, PPE, we still continue facing different delays. They're still subject to different challenges at the border. And this is something that really needs to be be resolved. And lastly, the key message that we want to deliver to you is that that a more connected world is better for us. It allows us to have better prospects for the future. So if you allow us, we want to leave you with these key recommendations. The first is that we definitely need to rethink the approach to border management. We need to emphasize the importance of coordinated border management, having all the different agencies talking to each other, and also having the great coordination with the public and private sector, and all the related economic agents that are involved in the process. The second recommendation would be to keep a streamlined process, and especially to emphasize the use of digitalization. This is to further support the cross-border of movement of goods. And one key step that you may take is to accelerate the implementation of the trade facilitation agreement, and ideally upgrading it by introducing international standards like the ones developed by the World Customs Organization. The third recommendation would be to adapt accordingly the regulatory framework and the guidelines. As it was mentioned several times today, we can't operate properly in an uncertain environment. So to the extent that we are able to make sure that the measures that have proved to be efficient are now moved into the legal frameworks, this will be better for everyone involved in the supply chain. And lastly, to extend the facilitation measures beyond the COVID-19 vaccines, also to all the other related products. And by doing this, we will definitely be supporting to build back better, both economically and also to be able to address future potential crises that we may face. And with this, I just want to thank you for this opportunity, and I'm more than happy to respond to any questions you may have. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Carlos, for those insightful remarks and for this very pragmatic recommendations. So we've heard now from research and manufacturing of vaccines. We've heard about authorization of vaccines. We've heard about distribution of vaccines. But of course, the supply chain is not complete without getting the vaccines into people's arms. So we're going to move now to our next session. Let me just say that we have extended the program for 30 minutes until 3:30 because the presentations have been so rich that we didn't want to interrupt any of our participants, but we still would like to get a few questions in. So with that, let me ask our first speaker in this session, Dr. Anne Lindström from WHO, to please take the floor.
Thank you, and really delighted to be here. If you look at this graph, this is what we have all jointly accomplished, right, in last year. The first and the most complex vaccine introduction globally. And it's really good to see all the private and public entities here today who've all pulled in the right direction today to make this possible. If you can see, we actually did this graph before 2021, and it's quite extraordinary that we all with collective efforts have made this jump of a vaccine to be introduced in all of the countries of the world, almost, apart from two, in less than a year, actually. And if you compare that to other vaccine introductions, that it's never been done. An enterprise, an historic enterprise of vaccine introduction like we've done today. So I'm both representing WHO, but also deputy in the COVID-19 vaccine delivery partnership, and working and supporting countries lagging behind, maybe needing extra help from different partners in a coordinated way when it comes to the getting the vaccines into arms. There is actually about 10 billion doses now, 10.3 billion doses that have been administered globally. We are still suffering from a painful inequity in the number of doses distributed across the world. And here you see a world map with the persons fully vaccinated per 100 population, with a few countries lagging severely behind the others, but still extraordinary by the AMC, Advanced Market Commitment, the COVAX 92 countries, low and lower middle income countries that are particularly fiercely supported by the COVAX facility, have delivered 3.2 billion doses until now. In COVAX, the enterprise has delivered, as we heard before, more than 1 billion doses to 144 participants in the previous year and until now, with a large supply increasing in the last quarter of 2021. However, what we see is that the high-income countries have distributed 13 times more the number of doses per 100 population. And you see the gray, the low-income countries, the gradient of much slower absorption due to both low supply in 2021 for many different reasons, but also of having the time and possibility to plan ahead the effective mass vaccination campaigns that we now see in so many countries coming up. The global target of 70% by the mid-year 2022 is going to be a huge lift for many of the low-income countries, with so far coverage rates of below 10% sometimes, compared to the high-income countries who've had a year to establish where they are today. This is a view over the supply and where we are with supply today in the 92 AMC countries. So as you know, the focus countries in low and lower middle income countries supported through the COVAX facility. This is actually a view with a lot of other doses coming from other suppliers as well. So it's COVAX and different rounds, but also non-COVAX doses. And the red one is the latest addition in the round 4 of supply that came in by the end of the year. If you look at this graph now, so the supply is still not enough, right? You see 55 AMC countries below 70% of secured supplies, 21 below 40, and 7 AMC even below 20%. So what COVAX facility and us in delivery partnership are trying to do now is having dialogues and a much better allocation framework in a way that we are trying to respond to what the ambitions of the countries themselves want to set for themselves. So there is a monthly review and a possibility to upload requests. So it's a pull down allocation, not rather than equitable distribution in an allocation framework. This is a new way we're doing it now, with actually responding to the country preferences of the vaccines and the number of doses that they would require in a running 1 month by 1 month, listening to, but also hearing about, if you're lagging behind, are there additional funding resources needed? Are there extra political engagement? Is there anything on TA, that technical assistance that is required? And how can we then, as global, regional, and country partners, respond to the needs expressed by the governments? So I've learned a lot over this very intense year. Countries know very much now where the bottlenecks are, and some of them are put here on the table. The political context and the in-country planning mechanisms. It's important with leadership and coordination. If that is not there, it's difficult. But it's also the lack of product visibility, multiple products, short shelf life and cold chain capacity, data management, and many competing priorities in low-income countries, which it also needs to be respected. The financing piece is another bottleneck that we see in many countries. that many donor money is coming a little bit too slow to be able to reach the countries exactly when they need to have them at hand to trickle down to facility and frontline providers of services at the time of mass vaccination campaigns. We're all painfully aware of lack of some trust in government and officials and health systems, and also the lack of in the vaccines themselves, the trust that is needed to be transmitted from government level and all the scientists and the trust of key informers in society and countries. Healthcare workers is one of the main actually bottlenecks at the moment. Many of the healthcare workers have been lost for many reasons, right? Either by the pandemic consequences, themselves being sick, either lockdowns, difficulties, and being pulled away from other pandemic responses within the health sector. So there is acute shortages of staffing in many, many ways. And I think that the healthcare workers should get an extra prize for this magic slide deck, that the first slide I showed about the introduction in every country around the world. The in-country supply chain is another one where really everything has been stretched to its limit right now. The new arrival of the ultra cold chain capacity in many countries, where you've had to adapt and learn and to deliver the vaccines requirement, this system, and then the data systems to know real time what's going on, who's being vaccinated, and being able to track the work and correct your actions. This slide shows all the 92 countries again in the ANC participants and the number of vaccines they are delivering. So again, emphasizing how complex this delivery is for countries. Many of these vaccines, and we've heard some of them today, have different cold chain requirements, different syringes, different administration modes, etc. And training packages are needed so that healthcare workers know how to handle safely all of these products, and a delivery strategy that actually matches and works with 3, 4, 5 products at the same time in one single country. Another complexity has been to reach the elderly. And so the roadmap of WHO is clearly saying we need to vaccinate the most vulnerable first. So the elderly, the healthcare workers, the groups, adults first with medical risk groups. This is, of course, a stretch in many countries where immunization programs not traditionally are and regularly reaching adult population in these risk groups. So it's a new shift in how to do these. And many countries have been inventive and creative in trying to find this group for vaccination. I want to also stress the importance of moving evidence all the time. And this is a snapshot of the latest roadmap from SAGE, recommending from WHO. In what order should we give out if we have the supplies to the countries to have the most benefit on severe disease or deaths? And this is the latest kind of sequencing of even additional doses or booster doses into high priority, medium, and lowest priority use. And this is a challenge right now when many countries move towards mass vaccination campaigns to reach coverage very fast. How do you at the same time make sure that you protect the most vulnerable, highest risk groups first, and then move over to other work groups? We've learned through this rollout as well the best practices in some countries that really have jumped into a high coverage very fast. A few of those success stories is high-level political engagement, strong political commitment. You have the heads of state being vaccinated on primetime television, etc. Adequate cold chain capacity, experience with mass vaccination campaigns, like Ethiopia, who in very, very short time mobilized a vaccination campaign and reached 5 million people. Kenya right now in the middle of a vaccine campaign. evidence-driven, and then electronic capturing, real-time visualization, and then also moving towards AFI. So I think I have very few moments to speak to the last slides. I just wanted to tell you that we have a new delivery partnership where we're working with all in a much more coordinated way to support the 34 countries below 10%, with 8 countries with immediate focus where we try to support on funding, TA, and country engagement to advance and reach higher percentage quickly. Yesterday or this week, there was a call for a finance. So the Act A call for a new finance framework. Really important for everyone here to know Tedros' voice to everyone that this is a finance framework set out fair share targets based on country gross domestic product. And so I hope you can have a look at this. Finally, last slide, I just want to say, a big shout out to all the health workers around the world who have done this miraculous 10.3 billion doses that has been delivered in the last year. We've learned so much on these complex vaccines, on how to do vaccination campaigns during a pandemic where the IPC measures need to be respected, and trying to find new vaccine groups, and learned many, many things that is also improving immunization programs like safety monitoring, etc., for the future, also for routine immunization. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, and for a presentation with many insights. And thanks for the great work of WHO, of course, in this area as well. Let me now move to Akash Mopal from the World Bank. Akash, the floor is yours, please.
Thank you. Thank you. Good morning and good afternoon, everyone. It's a great honor to be here in this panel, and I would like to thank the WTO for hosting this event. My name is Akash Mohapal, and I'm a senior economist at the World Bank. Today, I'm going to share a little bit more about Ecuador's experience with the successful vaccination campaign it has had against COVID-19. I think this Dr. Lindstrand's presentation was an excellent segue into this one, as I'm going to talk about directly the country perspective and what worked well in Ecuador to achieve such high rates of vaccination. Ecuador is a relatively small country of about 17 million people, perched in between Colombia and Peru. And from the early months of the pandemic, you may remember harrowing images coming out of Ecuador in newspapers and media relating to COVID. Since then, Ecuador has had a remarkable turnaround, achieving a vaccination rate at the population level of about 73% now, which corresponds to 80% vaccination of the target population, which is currently defined as the population over 5 years, of population 5 years and older. So I'm going to speak to some of the key ingredients that made this remarkable turnaround possible. So I'm going to focus on 4 ingredients which are responsible in my view for Ecuador's success, and which are also in turn 4 key messages for other countries who are trying to move towards high rates of vaccination. The first, as the previous speaker mentioned, is about strong commitment at the highest level and leadership and foresight in the case of Ecuador. In this case, the president of Ecuador had made vaccination his topmost priority for his term. The second is about how Ecuador has managed to involve all sections of society to undertake this historical exercise of vaccinating the entire population. This includes central and regional governments, universities, and the private sector. And this whole of society approach is really what has made mass vaccination possible in Ecuador. The third has to do with innovation and transparency. This has allowed Ecuador to address complex technical challenges, overcome data gaps, and build trust with its population. The final one, and this is where I think the role of international institutions like the World Bank comes in, is collaboration and trust. We have worked with Ecuador since the very beginning of the pandemic in March 2020, starting from March 2020. And and together with other financial institutions and technical institutions like the WHO and PAHO have been providing continued support to Ecuador. So I'm going to just quickly hone down on each of these messages. So like I was saying, on the first one, the president of Ecuador had really made vaccination a priority. And from the beginning, from the first plan, vaccination plan, which was presented in March of 2021, vaccines were available universally. So, to remind you, Ecuador is a country with a high influx of Venezuelan migrants. So vaccines were made available to Venezuelan migrants as well, of course, with the prioritization criteria set forth in the vaccination plan. Vaccines have since been made mandatory for most citizens, with the exception of those presenting with medical exemptions as of December 23 of 2021. When the new government came into power in May of 2021, they launched a very ambitious plan, which was denominated Plan 9-100. And the plan aimed to vaccinate 9 million people, or 50% of the population, within the government's first 100 days in office. This was actually achieved in 93 days. So here, the commitment from the government comes in place, but I think, behind this, another important factor was the foresight that the previous government and the current government had to achieve such high rates of vaccination. The government of Ecuador had worked hard to ensure access to vaccinations. It was one of the first countries in Latin America to sign the COVAX agreement in August of 2020. Similarly, it signed bilateral purchase agreements with AstraZeneca and Pfizer in October and December. The total number of doses that were signed amount to 33 million doses. The other thing I think that's very important in the case of Ecuador and links to this leadership was, from the very beginning, Ecuador was aware or recognized that vaccine is the most effective policy tool they had for safe economic reactivation. But this is something that the finance ministers at that time said to us, that this is the best tool I have, so we need to invest in this in spite of adverse fiscal conditions. So I think this leadership at the highest level and the foresight to engage with manufacturers and sign vaccine contracts really helped Ecuador reach where it is now. On the whole of society approach, Ecuador has been a leading example for coordination between public institutions, mobilizing police and military institutions for overcoming logistical challenges, regional governments, universities, as well as international organizations. The technical leadership comes from, of course, the Ministry of Health for risk communication, case detection and response, overcoming vaccine hesitancy, and as well as addressing adverse events. Another remarkable factor here is the partnership Ecuador has had with the private sector to address logistical challenges, and as well as to increase the number of vaccination centers. So here, what the Ecuador was able to do with the private sector was engage in partnerships with pharmacies, private pharmacies, to serve as vaccination centers, thereby overcoming the problem of a reduced health workforce, and in turn, the private sector pharmacies were also offering small gifts as incentives to the population to vaccinate. Along with this, Ecuador is a diverse country with indigenous groups and Venezuelan migrants, a significant share of rural population. A multi-pronged communication strategy was really helpful here in reaching these hard-to-reach populations. So the government engaged in a door-to-door approach using rapid response teams formed with 3 or 4 health workers. They reached out to community leaders, indigenous group leaders to make them aware about vaccinations and to get their communities to take up vaccination. So I think this whole of society approach was key in Ecuador achieving its current rates of vaccination. The third thing is got to do with innovation and transparency. We have to remember this was a historical undertaking, or this is a historical undertaking for any country. Never before in history had we had the need to vaccinate entire populations, right? So Here, innovation and transparency played an important role in overcoming logistical challenges and also building trust with the population. Ecuador did not have a social registry, but then recognizing that elections had just taken place in May of 2021, the electoral rolls were up to date. So Ecuador decided to use those to start the vaccination process equitably, because all population over 18 years of age is registered in the electoral rolls, while building the database to expand vaccination in the future to other population groups. The partnerships with the private sector was also very important to achieve mass vaccination efficiently and quickly. The private sector deployed its cold storage trucks to move vaccines across space and for storage, while the public sector was ramping up the cold chain capacity. As for transparency, the Ministry of Health and the President and the Vice President himself have held frequent briefings to the population, and the Vacuna Metro, or the vaccine meter, is a publicly available website which provides daily updates to the population on improving on the progress made in vaccination. This has in turn helped build trust in the government and increase the rates of vaccination. The fourth point, I think, and the credit here goes to the government of Ecuador for really bringing all the multilateral organizations, both technical and financing organizations, onto the same table from the very beginning. So since March of 2020, the Ministry of Health convened a meeting of all the technical partners to identify who is able to do what based on their comparative advantage. And this has also helped to reduce duplication of efforts and coordination between multilaterals to work towards the common goal of mass vaccination. After that, this has convened into weekly meetings with stakeholders. You can see the stakeholders here on the right, led by PAHO and the Ministry of Health. In these weekly meetings, we take stock of progress and identify challenges that are persistent or upcoming challenges, and figure out ways to address them in the best and most efficient manner. On the World Bank side, streamlined procedures to make financing accessible, and also to streamline processes to deploy resources quickly has helped to respond to the client's needs. I think a fair bit of credit also goes to the manufacturers here. When international institutions like us finance vaccines, there are additional criteria, or finance anything with our financing, there are additional criteria to be met. This is in addition to the criteria that may be imposed by the government itself. And we have had very good partnerships with the manufacturers to make sure that the activities we finance are complying with World Bank criteria. So just to give you an example, in this case, we held tripartite meetings with Pfizer, AstraZeneca, as well as Sinovac, to ensure that vaccine contracts can be shared, or confidentiality agreements can be partially waived, so the vaccine contracts could be shared with the World Bank, so that the World Bank could review it and finance it. So these are really in our view, the four key ingredients that made such mass vaccination possible in Ecuador. I'll go to this side quickly. There has been significant progress in vaccination, but much more needs to be done. We still need to reach full vaccination coverage and think about how to vaccinate the children below 5 years of age once they are eligible. Needless to say, there has been significant human capital losses during the pandemic, and worryingly in the coverage of the regular program of vaccination. And there remains a health system strengthening agenda to prepare the sector for future pandemics and to respond to other disasters as well. So these are some of the areas we hope to be working on with the government of Ecuador in the near future. And before I close, I just want to give a general overview of what the World Bank has been doing towards COVID-19 response. The bank has committed about $43 billion towards COVID-19 response, including $12 billion towards vaccine acquisition and development. There has been 63 contracts signed so far with 46 countries for a total of 416 million doses. Of these, about 137 million doses have been delivered. Aside vaccines, the World Bank has also deployed a new mechanism called bank facilitated procurement, which helps clients facilitate contracts between clients and manufacturers at the request of the client. So this procedure has at present 26 suppliers and with 450 products, which includes PPEs, ancillary kits for vaccination, as well as medical equipment for COVID response. Thank you, and I'm available for any questions at the end.
Thank you very much, Akash, for sharing with us the success story of Ecuador and highlighting the very important role that the bank has played in this regard. And this is our nice segue into the three final presentations of today. And let me now invite Professor Bushra Mehta from the Ministry of Health of Morocco. Last year, Morocco was one of the 5 African countries that reached the target of vaccinating 40% of their population. So, Professor Mehta, vous avez la parole, s'il vous plaît.
Merci beaucoup, Madame la Directrice Générale Adjointe, Madame Annabelle Gonzalez. Bonjour, Mesdames et Messieurs les délégués membres de l'OMC, Mesdames et Messieurs les participants. Alors, permettez-moi d'abord de vous donner un aperçu sur la campagne nationale de vaccination au Maroc. Next, s'il vous plaît. Alors, vous savez déjà que la pandémie, le rôle, bien sûr, du ministère de la Santé et le gouvernement, c'est la prévention primaire pour la vaccination, pour qu'on puisse arrêter la propagation du virus et éviter le décès de la population et aussi les impacts socio-économiques. La seule solution est avoir accès au vaccin. Et c'est pour ça que le Maroc a participé d'abord dans un essai clinique vaccinal. Et puis également, nous avons procédé à la signature des contrats d'achat de vaccins avec des négociations qui ont été commencées de façon très anticipative en avril 2020, c'est-à-dire 1 mois après le premier cas déclaré Covid au Maroc. Et également, donc, il y a eu la préparation de la stratégie nationale de la vaccination. Un comité national scientifique et technique de vaccination a été mis en place et où nous avons travaillé sur la veille des données nationales et internationales et surtout les déclarations de l'Organisation mondiale de la santé. Alors, le premier essai vaccinal en phase 3, c'est à l'instar de ce qui se passe à l'international. Le Maroc, comme j'ai dit, il a participé à un essai multicentré clinique du vaccin Sinopharm qui a été réalisé dans 3 hôpitaux. Et avec cet essai clinique, nous avons pu réaliser l'efficacité et la sécurité de ce vaccin qui était parmi le panel des vaccins qui étaient utilisés au début par le Maroc. Je veux souligner que le Maroc est le premier pays africain à lancer une campagne nationale de vaccination, une campagne massive. Sa Majesté le roi Mohamed VI a annoncé en novembre 2020 et a donné le lancement officiel le jeudi le 28 janvier 2021. Il a fait appel à la mobilisation de tous les parties prenantes du gouvernement, à savoir le ministère de la Santé, le ministère de l'Intérieur, le ministère des Affaires étrangères et le ministère des Finances et autres départements. Il y a eu aussi la mobilisation de la médecine militaire, également la mobilisation du secteur privé et surtout dans le domaine de la logistique. Et le principe que le Maroc a adopté, c'était une vaccination graduelle, c'est-à-dire nous avons commencé par la vaccination des personnes vulnérables âgées, atteintes de maladies chroniques, puis par la suite les frontliners, les militaires, les professionnels de la santé, et puis par la suite, effectivement, les gens et les professionnels de l'éducation. Et puis par la suite, on a continué par la vaccination par grade d'âge. Alors ça, c'est un schéma qui vous présente le circuit de l'acheminement du vaccin. C'est un processus qui est très délicat et qu'il faut maîtriser bien sûr toute la chaîne de distribution et toute la chaîne des bonnes pratiques de distribution depuis l'amont jusqu'à l'aval, c'est-à-dire depuis l'arrivée du vaccin à l'aéroport, donc depuis l'étranger. Donc, nous avons reçu le vaccin de l'Europe, de l'Asie et des États-Unis. Également, nous avons un dépôt central à Casablanca. Et par la suite, il y a une distribution régionale et provinciale jusqu'au centre de santé pour donner le vaccin à la population de façon directe dans les petits centres de santé. C'est un système, c'est un supply chain qui a obéi à une digitalisation complète depuis le début jusqu'à l'administration chez la population. Nous avons mis en place un système de rendez-vous avec des SMS sur les téléphones et des appels téléphoniques. Et également, il y a un système de gestion du stock de vaccins. Il y a eu le suivi de température pendant les lieux de stockage et pendant le transport. Et je cite aussi qu'il y a eu le transport à l'intérieur du Maroc par voie routière et par voie aérienne dans les villes lointaines pour assurer et pour réduire la durée de transport et maintenir la chaîne de froid. Alors, il y a eu aussi des équipes mobiles pour les zones rurales et les campagnes. Il n'y a pas accès à la population. Le ministère de la Santé a mobilisé avec le ministère de l'Intérieur des équipes mobiles de médecins et d'infirmiers pour vacciner la population chez eux. Et également, il y a une équipe mobile pour vacciner les enfants avant la rentrée scolaire. Et dernièrement, on a procédé à l'accélération de la vaccination en mettant en place des grands vaccinodromes à grande capacité qui œuvrent 7 jours sur 7, 12 heures de travail. Les vaccins qui sont autorisés au Maroc sont Sinopharm, AstraZeneca, Janssen, Sputnik, Sinovac, Pfizer et Covaxin. Mais nous avons utilisé au Maroc AstraZeneca, Sinopharm, Janssen et Pfizer. La réglementation d'autorisation du vaccin par la Direction de médicaments et de la pharmacie du Maroc, c'est l'autorité réglementaire nationale, après vérification bien sûr des données sur la qualité, sur la stabilité du vaccin, les études phase clinique, phase 3 qui ont été déposées par les laboratoires pharmaceutiques et également nous avons vérifié la maîtrise des process. Nous avons aussi une veille réglementaire pour savoir les verdicts et les décisions également de l'OMS et des autres autorités nationales, internationales. La libération des vaccins se fait lot par National Regulatory Authority et la surveillance des effets indésirables ont été suivis jusqu'à présent par le Centre national de pharmacovigilance qui est un centre collaborateur de l'OMS au Maroc. Donc là, c'est juste pour vous montrer une plateforme de notification des effets indésirables chez le vacciné. Donc, toute personne qui est vaccinée et qui démontre et qui présente un effet indésirable, elle peut le notifier immédiatement sur une plateforme et nous avons à peu près plus de 30 000 notifications à ce jour. Dans la plupart bénin et pas grave. Alors, la communication était très importante depuis le début de la campagne nationale de la vaccination pour convaincre les gens de l'intérêt de la vaccination et la protection, surtout de la population vulnérable et la population âgée. Donc, c'est pour ça que le processus de la communication a démarré avant la campagne et pendant tout le processus. Nous avons fait appel au comité scientifique pour convaincre, avec des données scientifiques probantes, les données sur l'efficacité et sur la qualité et la sécurité des vaccins fabriqués. Alors, le mécanisme COVAX, le Maroc a bénéficié des dons de mécanisme COVAX. Et j'utilise cette occasion pour remercier l'ensemble des partenaires du mécanisme COVAX. Nous avons reçu aujourd'hui 5,5 millions de doses du vaccin et le Royaume du Maroc a reçu par mécanisme d'achat 60 millions de doses et nous avons administré à ce jour plus de 50 millions de doses aux Marocains, entre dose 1, dose 2 et dose 3. Alors là, c'est les chiffres qui datent d'hier. Aujourd'hui, nous sommes à peu près à 24 millions de doses injectées en dose 1, 23 en dose 2. Et le Maroc, aujourd'hui, accélère la vaccination pour la dose du booster. Alors, les clés de succès, effectivement, je partage l'avis de mon collègue qui m'a précédé. que l'importance des instances de gouvernance était très importante pour réussir les campagnes nationales de vaccination pour chaque État. Et au Maroc, c'est le suivi et la direction royale au plus haut niveau qui a pu effectivement de mettre en place toutes les directives et toute la coordination nécessaire pour réussir la campagne au Maroc. Également, il y a eu le principe de l'équité, la solidarité, la gratuité, la volontariat et la transparence. Et il y a également la vaccination des Marocains et également les étrangers les résidents au Maroc. Un déploiement de proximité, donc nous sommes près de la population, à l'écoute de la population pour assurer une vaccination transparente. Alors, par rapport au projet de la fabrication locale des vaccins au Maroc, vous savez très bien que la pandémie Covid est une leçon pour le monde et la plupart des États, ils ont conclu que chaque État doit aussi veiller à une souveraineté sanitaire pour assurer une indépendance et également pour assurer la disponibilité des médicaments et des vaccins, surtout dans des cas d'urgence sanitaire. Donc, il y a une signature de convention pour le fill and finish avec Sinopharm depuis juillet 2021 et nous sommes très en avance et nous avons commencé cette fabrication avec toutes les études réglementaires nécessaires. Et en janvier 2022, il y a une signature d'une construction d'une usine de fabrication des vaccins et des médicaments de biotechnologie. Certes, il y a le défi qu'au jour d'aujourd'hui, nous assistons à des nouvelles technologies comme le vaccin ARN. Il est certes que le défi, c'est le temps nécessaire pour la validation des process pour la fabrication des vaccins et n'oublions pas le coût de l'investissement qui est très important. Je vous remercie pour votre attention et pour votre invitation. Merci.
Professeur Meda, merci de partager avec nous cette expérience très intéressante du Maroc. I would like now to offer the floor to Felipe Muñoz of the Ministry of Health of Chile to share the experience of organizing one of the first vaccination campaigns against COVID-19, which has resulted in Chile being the country with the highest vaccination rate in the region, covering over 90% of their population. Felipe, tiene la palabra, por favor.
Muchísimas gracias, directora Anabel González. En honor al tiempo, trataré de hacer una presentación breve para contar la experiencia chilena. Primero que todo, muchas gracias por la invitación a participar en este foro. Bueno, en primer lugar, quiero comentar parte de los pilares del proceso de vacunación en Chile, afectado obviamente por el contexto de pandemia en cuanto a una crisis económica global, a restricciones de la sociedad y restricciones de la movilidad, un desarrollo sin precedente tecnológico y científico y un estrés de nuestros sistemas sanitarios a nivel mundial que han influido necesariamente en estas campañas de vacunación alrededor del mundo. En nuestro caso particular, la historia de nuestro programa de inmunizaciones y la cultura en Chile favorable hacia la vacunación ha sido una pieza fundamental para el éxito, al igual que la negociación y la diversificación de la estrategia de abastecimiento, esto es a través de acuerdos bilaterales, acuerdos multilaterales, como por ejemplo el COVAX y lo que se ha visto durante la jornada, y también estrategias de estudios clínicos o desarrollo de estudios clínicos en el territorio para poder desarrollar o tener acceso preferente a la compra de distintas vacunas. También hay una parte muy relevante sobre la asesoría técnica y científica que hemos tenido desde la academia, por ejemplo, universidades, sociedades científicas que han apoyado las decisiones y han dado apoyo a la evidencia, una comunicación basada muy fuertemente en la técnica, en lo científico, para dar confianza a la ciudadanía, una red de salud muy robusta que, a pesar del estrés que ha tenido, ha podido desarrollar la vacunación durante todo el 2021 y ahora en 2022. El robustecimiento también, al igual que lo anterior, del recurso humano, de la infraestructura y de la cadena de frío necesaria para mantener la conservación de vacunas. Y también lo que hablaba también anteriormente nuestra colega en la presentación anterior sobre la coordinación, la gobernanza finalmente y la eficiencia logística del Estado o de los gobiernos como motores de la vacunación. Un poco de contexto, Chile está ubicado en Sudamérica, tiene alrededor de 20 millones de habitantes, se divide en regiones, son 16 regiones a lo largo del país, y tiene una extensión de 4.270 kilómetros. Por lo tanto, para tener un contexto de lo complejo que podría llegar a ser la logística en nuestro país, se da básicamente por la lejanía o la distancia entre nuestras regiones y la capital. Y en este gráfico también podemos ver la situación de vacunación al 8 de febrero. Contábamos con más de 17 millones de vacunas administradas, lo que representa un avance del 92% de avance de vacunación con primeras y únicas dosis, y sobre 17 millones de personas vacunadas, lo que tiene una cobertura de un 89% de la población. En el lado derecho de la pantalla se puede observar las coberturas por grupos etarios, y en el gráfico siguiente, en el que está más abajo, se puede apreciar la cobertura por región, lo que nos deja un panorama bastante homogéneo en el territorio y por grupos etarios. Básicamente el proceso, bueno, se ha descrito en esta reunión en extenso. Esto trata un poco de graficar en resumen todo lo que ha implicado la implementación de la campaña, desde los aspectos regulatorios de la fabricación y el registro en emergencia de las vacunas, más de 300 desarrollos que se puede observar en la página de la OMS, el desarrollo de 300 proyectos de vacunas, algunos ya obviamente están en proceso de fabricación, otros en espera, la importación de vacunas a través de los acuerdos comerciales que se han tenido a través de COVAX, por ejemplo, también ahí ha sido también importante para nosotros, y la articulación o la organización del gobierno para poder colaborar con el sector privado en la importación, internación y distribución de vacunas. Hay una parte muy importante de calidad de nuestra Agencia Regulatoria Nacional para poder autorizar las vacunas en Chile, analizar la evidencia e ir actualizando la evidencia a medida que los laboratorios van entregando mayor información, por ejemplo, sobre uso en edades menores, sobre cambios en la cadena de frío. Por otro lado, la distribución se hace también a nivel centralizado y a nivel regional, para poder llegar a la red de salud y finalmente poder realizar la vacunación. Y en último lugar, y no menos relevante, es el registro de la vacunación, poder tener la trazabilidad, el registro nominal de las personas, es decir, con su identificación, poder hacer el seguimiento, la vigilancia y hacer o generar los pases de movilidad para poder tener acceso a diferentes servicios en Chile para los vacunados, ¿cierto? Parte de las vacunas que hemos tenido en Chile, de estos laboratorios, Sinovac, Pfizer BioNTech, AstraZeneca, CanSino, también hemos tenido, no como vacuna, obviamente, pero sí como un mecanismo de compra, a COVAX, y próximamente la vacuna de Moderna, durante el primer trimestre del año 2022. Algunos hitos importantes del proceso: en diciembre, el 24 de diciembre de 2020, el inicio de la vacunación en Chile, posteriormente en febrero, la apertura a la vacunación masiva, y una serie de hitos que se han ido desarrollando hasta esta semana, iniciar la administración de la cuarta dosis o segundo refuerzo en la población sobre 55 años. La organización de la vacunación se ha hecho a través de calendarios de vacunación, donde se hace el llamado a la población a vacunarse dependiendo de su edad o del periodo en el cual recibieron su vacuna, para ir avanzando en la estrategia e ir llegando a todas las personas en el territorio nacional. Una mirada al registro. El registro nominal permite, como les decía anteriormente, tener los datos de cobertura nacionales, los datos oficiales del país, y además tener acceso a esta herramienta que es el pase de movilidad, para poder moverse en el país, tener acceso a diferentes servicios y poder incluso viajar dependiendo de la necesidad de los turistas o de las personas. Y finalmente, para terminar esta presentación, los desafíos que quedan por delante es revisar el uso de refuerzo y la efectividad que ellos tienen, la vacunación de niños de lactantes de menos de 3 años, la eficacia de los esquemas heterólogos, que a medida que vayan apareciendo más tipos de vacuna se va a poder revisar, la eficacia de las vacunas frente a las diferentes variantes del virus, la periodicidad de la vacunación, es decir, vamos a tener una vacunación anual o 2 veces al año, eso también va a estar en discusión, cuáles son los grupos prioritarios para la vacunación, las nuevas tecnologías que también se habló en este foro, cuáles han sido las plataformas que se han desarrollado en este contexto, y finalmente la recuperación económica y social, finalmente, quizás a los niveles pre-pandemia, pero también que esto ha sido una herramienta para esos fines. Muchísimas gracias.
Muchas gracias, Felipe, por esta presentación. And last but not least, I would like to invite Dr. Chansai Patamabong from the Ministry of Health of Lao PDR to share her experience in overcoming misinformation and vaccine hesitancy and reaching remote populations. This has been crucial to advance the vaccination campaign in Lao PDR. So Dr. Chansai, the floor is yours, please.
Can you see the screen?
Yes, thank you.
Okay. Okay, thank you very much, the chair. Good afternoon. My name is Dr. Chansai Patamawong, Deputy Director of National Immunization Program. Thank you very much for inviting and give me the opportunity to present for the getting vaccine into in Lao. My presentation talking for the challenges of the vaccination, and second for the strategy deploy, and last for the COVID vaccine communication. This is the slide I would like to talking the challenges of the vaccination in Lao PDR. The first, we know that the Lao PDR situation in Southwest Asia, we are a landlocked country with the 70% of the mountain area. Majority of Lao people are living in tourist mountains area and isolated from the outside of the world. And as you see the picture, there has the 3 brands blocking the roads. And the first, the car cannot access, and some of the village is not accessible by road. And some area need to travel, like you see in the picture, by boat. And there are still high number of the unvaccinated. And other hard to list group is the hard to mobilize the people. So many elderly and handicapped people are not vaccinated. This is other challenges with is the vaccine hesitancy. Elderly people with the underlying health condition and minority group. The main reason for the hesitancy is the fear of side effect of the vaccine. Elderly and the people underlying health condition are hesitancies because the fear that they will get sick or die after the vaccine. And also the ethnic minority in Laos refuse to get the second dose of the vaccine because the fear of minor side effect of the first dose. Then other main reason for the hesitancy is the low risk perception on COVID-19. Some elderly said is no need to get the vaccine because they only stay home and will not get the infected by COVID-19. This is we are talking for the strategy deployed. The strategy of the Lao PDR deploy was focusing on the micro planning to ensure no one is left behind. We also conduct how, like you see in the picture, and vaccination to ensure all elderly and handicapped population are covered. Furthermore, we are working with the UNICEF, WHO, and communication team to strengthen community engagement. Health education section on the importance of the vaccine with the village and local authority, as well as conduct the quality community meeting together between village authority and healthcare workers. And also we have to develop tailored measures for elderly and hesitancy group. This is, we are talking about the community COVID vaccine communication. We also working with closely with the UNICEF, WHO for strategy implementing and monitoring risk communication and community engagement activity across Lao PDR. To strengthen the existing risk communication community engagement, work on ground we along with the mass organization. Lao Front, the National Development conducts risk community engagement toolkits for wireless development partner to share their communication materials with each other. And also we have been working closely with Ministry of Information, Culture and Tourism, and also with the partner like UNICEF, WHO for ensuring active media engagement for COVID-19 communication. And also we have organized media briefing with the journalists as well as a senior editor for disseminating audits and updated information. And also we conduct the panel discussion to ensure clearly communication and help stop to speed of the misinformation. And the last slide, we are also talking the COVID vaccine communication, and we conduct the launch of the vaccine Lao campaign is close collaboration with the UNICEF and WHO to mass COVID-19 vaccination roll out in Lao PDR. By this interactive and engaging communication materials for online and offline engagement are being developed under this campaign. And also we focus the campaign and messaging and addressing various issues related to the COVID-19 vaccine and vaccination in Lao PDR. And also we develop a material like free SaaS and graphical poster and job aid and others materials. And the important days for the World Children's Day in the November 2021, we realized audio and video version of the COVID-19 song produced with the Lao national singer. The song is being played from village loudspeaker as well as via radio station. And we also produce the 5 video with the mix of the graphic and human story around COVID-19 vaccination. And also we produce the audio spots in 3 different local languages for the better accessibility. And we also continue to develop and produce the more engaging and interactive materials in the second phase of the vaccination Lao Laos campaign. This is for the my presentation that's on. If you have any question, please give me for the question. Thank you very much for your kind attention.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Dr. Chansai, for sharing the experience of Lao PDR and this amazing vaccination campaign that you undertook. So this session has shown us the last stretch of the vaccine race. That is what we need to do to actually turn vaccines into vaccinations. So with this, I trust that you will agree with me that the outstanding quality of our speakers' presentations made it worthwhile to take a bit more time to listen directly to each one of them, even if we will not be able to go into the Q&A segment, for which I apologize. Let me thank all of our speakers for their contributions. You have provided valuable and practical up-to-date insights on the vaccine global supply chain and on the key role of trade in expediting the manufacturing, authorization, and distribution of vaccines. I would also like to thank participants based in Geneva and around the world. We hope that the workshop provides you with useful tools for your work at the WTO and beyond. Please complete the online survey. Let us know what you think about today and the topics that you would like to explore in future activities. And of course, many thanks to the wonderful WTO team who put this workshop together. Thank you all for joining us. See you soon.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, everyone. Bye-bye. Please complete the survey before you go. Thank you.
Yes, bye-bye. Thank you.
Bye.
Bye-bye.